With us now on the Trump factor in this campaign, and of course a lot more, is our election war room panel of current and former top campaign strategists. Zita Astrovas held several senior leadership roles with the Trudeau government. She's now a vice president at Wellington Advocacy and is advising the Liberal campaign. Jason Leader is a veteran of conservative war rooms. He's now president of Enterprise Canada. And Anne McGrath here in studio is a spokesperson for the NDP campaign. Hi, everybody. Very nice to see you. And we've sort of had this odd start to the campaign in that in advance of it, Trump was the dominant factor. Throughout the past few days, though, I think the majority of the announcements and even the narrative have either been around, leadership issues, which we'll get into in a moment, or affordability announcements. With something like this, though, the external X factor, the idea that Trump's about to announce something we don't even know how it will directly apply to Canada, how does that potentially change what the strategy is being, like what kind of strategy is being discussed behind in closed doors in the war room?
Well, it's true that the Trump factor has had an impact on the electoral landscape, and it's had a huge impact on the economy. I mean, we're already seeing things like preemptive layoffs. And of course, we don't know whatever he says in the next little while, we don't know what he's going to say tomorrow. Right. So the volatility of his presidency is a huge factor, I think, in the campaign, and it's layered on top of what was already an affordability crisis. Like most Canadians, and like we've been going door to door across the country, and people are worried about the cost of living. They're worried about housing and the lack of housing, lack of affordable housing, and they're worried about grocery prices. They're worried about not being able to get a family doctor. So all of those kinds of things are sort of foremost in voters' minds, I think. And then added to that is the presence of these preemptive layoffs, but also the worry about what's going to happen next. And the fact that we don't necessarily have politicians who are focused on protecting people during this really difficult time. We have an EI system, for instance, that does not even cover most of the workers that pay into it. And we need a really big transformation of the EI system so that it actually works for workers.
So Anne's comments and also Jagmeet Singh's over the past little while, we do anticipate Zita, he'll talk in a bit, show us a bit about how the NDP is trying to carve out space on the Trump factor. Strategically, how are the Liberals trying to do that?
Well, I think if you look at the first couple of days of the campaign, which we all have to remind ourselves kicked off on Sunday, Mark Carney and the campaign went to Gander in Newfoundland, obviously a very historic place that, is a musical that we all enjoy, but really an important image and place in Canada and the U.S. in terms of shared history of how we've been partners and allies before. Today, Mark Carney was in Windsor talking about the auto sector before the Trump announcement that is to come in a couple minutes, about support for the auto sector. And he's been really strong and candid with this U.S. advisory panel with Canadians, Lana Payne from Unifor, people across the business sector on how best the government of Canada can support workers in this time as we're all watching what the president is going to announce. Mark Carney and the campaign have been nimble, whether it's in location, talking about affordability, or whether it's talking about support for the auto sector this morning. And we'll see what else he has to say this afternoon. But they've been really nimble from that perspective and being able to talk to workers and support for Canadians and other platform issues that have been first and foremost in Canadians' minds. But they've really been pounding pounding doors with that message on we're here for you, we hear you, and we're going to have your back in the weeks and months and years to come.
Yeah, I think it's no accident, Jason, that they were in Gander, that they're in Windsor. If you look at one of the more recent Abacus polls, it shows if you think Trump is the big thing you're worried about, certainly the Liberals have a significant advantage. If you are most concerned about affordability, the Conservatives have a significant advantage. What does that inform from your perspective as to how the Conservatives deal with Trump throughout the campaign, particularly on a day like today, for example, if he does come out with some punishing tariffs?
Yeah, by the way, I'm surprised that Mark Carney's not been in Manhattan or Bermuda. He's been answering a lot of questions about the places that he's organized his business over the last couple of days. So, those are his home bases, as you know, and he's like to explain. I'll say this about the Conservatives. They've got to make this an election about affordability and about the last 9 or 10 years and the fact that Mr. Carney has no plan. I think Mr. Carney said one thing over the last couple of days that's actually true, and I think most Canadians will come to agree with over the course of the campaign, which is we can't really determine what Mr. Trump does. All we can do is react to him. And I think what Mr. Poilievre is doing, setting a really, really good frame, which is the Liberals ran us into the ground for the last 9 or 10 years, and I'm going to do some things. He's talked about tax cuts. He's talked about making housing more affordable. He's talked about today a package for seniors. And I think, Anne, you made a good point earlier. Canadians are going to have to decide, somebody's going to deal with Mr. Trump one way or another. Whatever he says on auto tariffs today, we know it's not good. It's not going to make the markets go good. It's not going to make Canadian automakers or U.S. automakers happy. The truth is we're in for that in the beginning of April as well. We're in for a week of that on April 1st, April 2nd, and there's reciprocal tariffs. The thing that Canadians have to decide is who's best to deal with this and who's best to actually deliver a plan. The guys who ran you into the ground and weakened Canada's economy to the point that we can hardly respond, or somebody else. Poilievre has to make the case for change.
So I have to ask you, Anne, because what Jason just laid out is a version of what the former leader of the NDP essentially wrote. Basically, because the threat is so big, it's a two-way race, and Canadians really should only be choosing between two people who could form government. How does the NDP respond to something like that as far as its strategy goes?
Well, I have to say I completely disagree with what Tom Mulcair
I would
wrote.
anticipate you would, yeah.
And I can't imagine any other former leader of any party doing that, really. But one of the things that I think has been very clear in all of this is that there is a kind of an upsurge in Canadian pride and sovereign, discussions about sovereignty, buying Canadian, all of those kinds of things. And in that period of time, I think one of the things I think it's important to point out is that when you talk to people about what makes us different from the Americans, what they talk about are things that are very associated with the NDP, whether it's public health care, public pensions, social programs, now dental care and pharmacare, things that are very associated with the NDP. And the other thing I would say is, we are not a two-party state like the Americans. And I think we're better off for that, having a multi-party system. And I think that the things that the NDP has been able to do over the decades, what former leaders have done over the decades, have really improved the lives of working Canadians.
Zita and Jason, I want to get you guys also on the questions around leadership on both in both camps. You heard Zita, Jason make that joke about Bermuda. That was the story today vis-a-vis the CBC earlier, that essentially at Brookfield, where he chaired, where he was the chair of the board, there were two investment funds that had holdings in Bermuda as well as other places, but obviously there's a tax advantage in Bermuda. The question yesterday was about Pierre Poilievre and security clearance when the Globe first reported early in the day that the 2022 leadership race saw alleged interference from India in the form of supporting Pierre Poilievre's bid. Lots of information came out about how there was no proof that he knew or that it conclusively affected the race, but he still does not or has not received security clearance to further investigate that. Do you think those questions are informing the way Canadians view these two leaders?
I certainly think that, they're looking at who can represent Canada in the strongest way against Trump, right? And you have Mark Carney, who was able to guide Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. He has a proven track record on Brexit when he was governor of the Bank of England. And he's bringing that experience not as a politician, but truly as a practitioner of guiding governments through really tough economic times, which when staring down President Trump, Mark Carney already has the resume to do it. You have Pierre Poilievre, who has Danielle Smith in Alberta doing his bidding, which he does not want to address in the news and, doesn't want to answer those questions. And of course, Mr. Carney has taken a number of questions, unlike the Conservatives who don't have media traveling with them on this campaign. Mr. Carney has been answering questions around his previous financial dealings and has been above reproach in terms of disclosure, filing all of his paperwork months in advance than it was supposed to. But that's just a distraction on that, Mr. Poilievre wants to play. At the end of the day, Mr. Carney presented an auto sector plan today in advance of what was to come from the White House. He's consulting advisors on the Canada-U.S. panel. He has, the economy and where Canada needs to go years from now, and certainly what we need over the next couple of weeks, and frankly, the duration of the campaign, but also the duration of the Trump administration well in hand. And he's showing that day by day with Canadians on the campaign trail.
Jason, Zita used the word distraction, and Conservatives are saying the same about questions around the security clearance. Are these distractions, or are they in some ways resonating with Canadians who are, trying to make a determination about these two individuals?
Any piece of information and data that they get about these two individuals is going to be used. We're in an election campaign. Canadians, Mr. Carney's been like sort of back in Canada and back in the news for a couple of months. He's been prime minister for a few days. People are going to try to use any piece of information about either of these individuals. They know Mr. Poilievre, by the way. They've come to a conclusion, it looks like from public research, that they like his ideas and they're not sold yet on whether or not they want him leading the country, but they're willing to listen. In terms of Mr. Carney, they like his resume, and they've been sold on a bill of goods that he's a savior. You just heard Zita talk about it. He managed us through the 2008 financial crisis. I was in PMO then. I know who was managing the crisis. I know what Mr. Carney did. He did a fine job as the Bank of Canada governor. He didn't manage us through that crisis. But anyway, be that as it may, I think any piece of intelligence that you get helps you decide which of these two men. And I'll just say this. I'm a business owner in Canada. So look about this controversy with Mr. Carney today. I'm a business owner in Canada. If I did the things that Mr. Carney did, for example, move my head office to Manhattan and then pretend that it wasn't going to have any impact in Canada, or if I organized my affairs and said, no, it's better for Canadians if I organize it in Bermuda, because then all my employees and everybody else will be better off, and all the people who benefit from my business, they'll be better off and they'll have more money. People would laugh me out. If Pierre Poilievre had his rental apartment and organized that in Bermuda, the Liberals would be crying foul and say, what in God's name? This guy doesn't believe in Canada at all. Mr. Carney's got some really tough questions to answer for the next couple of months or the next month or so. And I think people are going to be making decisions on both men, deciding which one of these people is going to stand up to Trump the best.
Yeah, my sense is there's tough questions for everyone. I got to leave it there. Thanks, everyone, for making the time for the discussion. Look forward to our chats every Wednesday. Anne McGrath, Jason Leader, and Zita Astravas.